Meet Marcus Wright, a soft-spoken yet influential man in his mid-40s. Marcus has built a successful career as a tech entrepreneur, founding his own startup that quickly grew into a multi-million-dollar company. Although he could afford a life of luxury, Marcus prefers to live humbly in his childhood neighborhood, where he's well respected for his generosity and mentorship to young people. The community sees him as a beacon of hope, a man who never forgot where he came from. However, Marcus carries a part of his past in silence. Years ago, he was an operative in a highly classified branch of the military. His skills, honed through years of rigorous training and dangerous missions, are buried under layers of discretion. He left that life behind to focus on his family and his business, swearing never to reveal his secret past. To everyone around him, he's just Marcus, the successful, kind-hearted man who gives back to his community. Tonight, Marcus is heading home from an event hosted by a local charity he helped fund. His tailored suit is wrinkled from the long day, and his expression is weary but content as he drives through a part of town known for being rough. He often passes through here because it's home, and he believes the people here deserve the same respect as anyone else. Little does he know, tonight's drive will change everything. The incident. As Marcus navigates the familiar streets, a pair of headlights appears in his rearview mirror, growing closer by the second. The flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser begin to flicker, signaling him to pull over. Confused, Marcus checks his speedometer. He wasn't speeding, and he knows his car registration and insurance are up to date. He slows down and pulls to the side of the road, rolling down his window as two officers approach his car. Their faces are stern, and the energy in the air immediately shifts to something hostile. Marcus places his hands on the steering wheel, a gesture of compliance he's learned all too well as a black man in America. "Good evening, officers. May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Marcus asks calmly, keeping his voice even. Officer Daniels, the older of the two, glares at Marcus before barking a curt response. "Step out of the vehicle, sir. This is a high-crime area, and we got reports of suspicious activity." Marcus frowns, his mind racing. Suspicious activity. He had been driving home from a charity event, and there had been no traffic violations. Something wasn't right, but Marcus knew better than to argue. "Officer, with all due respect, I've done nothing wrong. I'm just trying to get home. Is there something specific you need to discuss?" He tries again, hoping to de-escalate the situation. Daniels doesn't answer. Instead, his partner, Officer Reed, shines a flashlight into Marcus's face, peering into the back seat of the car. "We'll need to search your vehicle," Reed says, his tone dripping with suspicion. Prejudiced assumptions. Marcus feels his heart rate quicken. Why are they escalating this? His calm demeanor is clearly being misread as non-compliance. In his mind, he's already rehearsing the headlines. Black man arrested in high crime area. Assumed guilty. The neighborhood he's driving through has a reputation, but Marcus refuses to believe that his presence alone justifies the treatment he's receiving. Officer Daniels crosses his arms, eyes narrow and accusing. "What are you doing in this part of town, dressed like that? Doesn't seem like you belong here." Marcus clenches his jaw, realizing that the officers have already made up their minds about him. To them, he's not a successful businessman heading home from a charity event. He's just another black man in a suit, driving a nice car in a part of town they consider suspicious. "Officers, I live nearby. I've been through this area 1,000 times. I'm just heading home after a long day," Marcus explains, trying to remain patient. His frustration grows as Daniels leans in closer. "You live here? In this neighborhood?" Daniels laughs. "You sure about that? Let me guess, you work in finance or something, right? You wouldn't happen to be carrying any substances, would you?" Marcus shakes his head, keeping his composure despite the urge to snap back. The insinuation is infuriating, but he knows that one wrong move, one sharp word, could escalate the situation further. The wrongful arrest. "I don't consent to any searches, "Officers, I've done nothing wrong, and I'd appreciate it if we could handle this civilly," Marcus says, his voice steady but firm. That's when Officer Reed steps forward, suddenly grabbing Marcus by the arm. "Out of the car now. We're not asking." The force of Reed's grip shocks Marcus. He stumbles out of the vehicle, raising his hands in surrender as the two officers shove him against the side of his car. His heart pounds as they pat him down, disregarding his protests. "Officer, this isn't necessary," Marcus insists, his voice shaking slightly. "I haven't broken any laws. You're making a mistake." But the officers ignore him. Daniels pulls out a pair of handcuffs, roughly yanking Marcus's arms behind his back. The cold metal bites into his wrists, a harsh reminder of the systemic injustice he has always feared but hoped he would never personally face. Suspicious behavior, resisting a search, failure to comply. "You're under arrest," Daniels says matter-of-factly, reciting a list of offenses that Marcus knows are fabricated. His mind reels as he's led toward the police cruiser, unable to believe what's happening. As Marcus is pushed into the backseat of the cruiser, the reality of his situation sinks in. His carefully constructed life, his reputation, and the respect he's earned, none of it matters in this moment. To these officers, he's just another suspect in a world where black men are too often seen as criminals first and individuals second. The drive to the station feels like an eternity. Marcus stares out the window, watching the world pass by, wondering how things spiraled out of control so quickly. He's been patient, he's been respectful, but none of it has made a difference. In his mind, Marcus begins to consider the steps he might take next. He knows who he is, and he knows that this wrongful arrest won't define him. But the question lingers. Will the officers realize who he truly is before it's too late? Or will they remain blinded by their prejudice, unaware of the storm that's coming? The real question now is how, and when, Marcus will reveal his true identity, and how these officers will react when they learn they've arrested a man whose influence and power far exceed their expectations. The first cracks of their assumptions are about to show, but for now, Marcus remains silent, biding his time and waiting for the moment to turn this situation upside down. Inside the police station, Marcus is roughly escorted into the police station, still handcuffed, his tailored suit now creased and dirty from the manhandling he endured. The fluorescent lights above flicker as he's guided through the narrow hallway toward the booking desk. The station is bustling with activity, officers chatting among themselves, radios buzzing with dispatch updates, and detainees sitting behind barred windows. Officer Daniels and Officer Reed bring Marcus to the front desk, where the desk sergeant looks him over with the same indifferent, almost disdainful expression. "What's this one for?" the sergeant asks, barely looking up as he fills out paperwork. "Resisting arrest. Suspicious behavior," Daniels responds coolly. He doesn't mention that there was no real cause for Marcus's arrest, no evidence of wrongdoing, just assumptions and prejudice. Marcus, still calm but seething inside, stands quietly as his pockets are emptied and his personal belongings, wallet, phone, watch, are placed into a small plastic bin. The officers don't ask for his ID or any verification of who he is. They've already decided that he's a nobody, another face they can process and forget about by the end of their shift. As Marcus is led toward the holding cell, the humiliation deepens. Some of the officers in the station chuckle to themselves, exchanging whispers. One of them even makes a crude joke as Marcus passes by, something about how he's overdressed for the occasion. Marcus hears every word, but he remains silent, his jaw clenched. He refuses to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He's placed in a cold, dimly lit cell with a few other detainees. Most of them are slumped on the benches, lost in their own worlds. Marcus sits down in the far corner, still handcuffed, his mind racing with thoughts of how absurd this entire situation is. A man of his stature and success, locked up with common criminals because of a traffic stop and the color of his skin. It feels surreal, like a nightmare he's trying to wake from. But the cold metal around his wrists is a constant reminder that this is all too real. The protagonist's thoughts. As Marcus sits in the cell, his mind drifts back to his past, a past he's worked so hard to keep buried. He remembers his time in the military, the covert operations, the high-stakes missions where one wrong move could mean the difference between life and death. He was once a man of immense power, a man trusted by the highest levels of government to complete missions that never made the news, missions that protected lives in ways most people could never imagine. He had medals, honors, and a career that could have skyrocketed him to the top of the defense world, yet he walked away from it all. The decision to leave was deliberate. After years of operating in the shadows, Marcus craved peace. He wanted to build something of his own, something not tied to violence or secrecy. His tech company had given him that, a life of achievement, creativity, and philanthropy. Yet here he was, in a police cell, being treated like a criminal because two officers decided his appearance didn't match the car he drove or the neighborhood he was in. Marcus contemplates revealing his identity. He could easily demand a phone call, contact someone from his old world, and have the entire precinct flipped upside down in a matter of minutes. He imagines the look on Officer Daniel's face when he realizes the man he arrogantly shoved into a holding cell was once more powerful than he could ever comprehend. The thought brings Marcus a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but he pushes it away. There's a lesson here, one that needs to be taught. Revealing his identity too soon would rob him of the opportunity to address the systemic issues at play. The assumptions, the biases, the racism. He knows that his identity will come out eventually. But for now, he chooses silence. He watches and waits. The protagonist's family. While Marcus is in the cell, his wife, Amara, is at home, pacing the living room floor. It's unlike Marcus to be late without calling or texting, and as the hours tick by, her worry grows into panic. She's already tried calling his phone several times, but it goes straight to voicemail. Something's wrong. She knows it in her gut. Amara calls their daughter, Maya, who is away at college. Maya, I can't get in touch with your father. He was supposed to be home hours ago. Have you called the hospitals? Maya asks, her voice tense. What if something happened to him on the road? Amara's heart sinks at the thought. She immediately starts calling local hospitals, asking if anyone matching Marcus's description has been admitted. Each call brings the same answer. No one by that name or description has come in. Her next move is to call the local precincts, but they give her the runaround. Without knowing that Marcus has been arrested, she's left in the dark, frantically searching for answers. The hours drag on, and Amara's sense of dread grows. Her husband is missing, and she doesn't know where to turn next. A mysterious figure. Back in the holding cell, Marcus closes his eyes and tries to center himself. His training taught him to remain calm in the face of adversity, to keep his emotions in check even in the most volatile situations. But memories from his past keep surfacing, unbidden. He recalls the time he was deployed overseas, tasked with protecting a foreign dignitary during a high-profile summit. The mission had gone awry, and Marcus had single-handedly saved the lives of several world leaders, including his own. It was one of those moments that solidified his reputation as a hero, though the public would never note his name. That's how it had to be, silent heroism, without recognition. But here in this police station, his identity is far from heroic. To these officers, he's just another black man to be shuffled through the system. They have no idea who they're dealing with, no clue that Marcus could call in favors from people with more authority than they could dream of. He knows that with one phone call, he could have government officials descending on the station, demanding his release. Yet, he chooses not to. He's no longer the man he once was. He's Marcus Wright, a successful entrepreneur who built his life on integrity and quiet strength. He wants to see how this will play out, wants to understand the depth of the injustice he's facing before he decides how to reveal his true identity. In his mind, the flashbacks of his powerful past are contrasted with his present situation. The two worlds are colliding in ways he never anticipated. But Marcus is ready. He knows that his silence won't last forever. And when the truth comes out, these officers will have to confront the weight of their prejudice. The waiting game. As the hours pass, Marcus remains calm, his thoughts a mixture of frustration, resolve, and curiosity. How long will it take for them to realize their mistake? Will they acknowledge the error on their own, or will it require the intervention of someone higher up? The tension in the station is palpable. Marcus can see that Officer Reed is becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Reed glances at Marcus from time to time, as if sensing that there's more to him than meets the eye. Daniels, on the other hand, remains smug and oblivious, convinced that he's in control of the situation. For now, Marcus stays silent, watching the officers, the clock, and the unfolding events with quiet intensity. The time for action will come soon, but for now he waits, letting the tension build as his true identity remains hidden in the shadows. The reckoning is coming, and when it does, the officers will be left reeling, completely unprepared for the truth they're about to uncover. Police interactions. Behind the closed doors of the police station, the atmosphere is thick with arrogance and false confidence. Officer Daniels and Officer Reed sit at their desks, casually discussing their recent arrest of Marcus, neither realizing the magnitude of the mistake they've made. Guys driving a nice car through this part of town at night. What do they think? That we're not gonna stop him. Daniels says, leaning back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He's convinced that Marcus is just another wealthy criminal trying to slip under the radar, probably dealing or laundering money. These guys think they're untouchable because they've got cash. Reed, who is still slightly uneasy about the situation, nods but with less enthusiasm. Yeah, but something's off about him. He didn't act like most of them do when we bring them in. Daniels snorts dismissively. You're overthinking it. He's got a suit, a fancy car, but that doesn't mean he's clean. You saw how he refused to let us search the car. Probably hiding something. The two officers laugh, their conversation filled with baseless assumptions and stereotypes. To them, Marcus's silence and calm demeanor are just further proof that he's guilty of something. They're too wrapped up in their preconceived notions to see beyond the surface. Eventually, Officer Reed decides to run a background check, more out of routine than suspicion. He types Marcus's name into the system and waits as the search begins. Moments later, the results come back. Nothing. No criminal record, no history of arrests or trouble with the law. Marcus Wright is clean, a law-abiding citizen with no blemishes on his record. Reed frowns, perplexed. There's nothing on him. No priors, no flags. The guy's squeaky clean. Daniels waves it off. That doesn't mean anything. He's probably just good at covering his tracks. Trust me, I've seen guys like him before. They think they're smarter than us, think they can get away with anything. Despite the clean record, the officers decide to keep Marcus in custody. Their pride won't let them admit they might have made a mistake. They convince themselves that they'll find something, anything, to justify the arrest. In their minds, Marcus's calm demeanor is just another trick, a way of lulling them into complacency. They can't imagine that the real truth is far more shocking than anything they've assumed. The protagonist's patience. Back in the holding cell, Marcus sits quietly, his posture relaxed, but his mind sharp. He's well aware of the officers' conversations and their baseless assumptions. He can feel their eyes on him whenever they pass by, their expressions filled with condescension and unwarranted suspicion. But Marcus doesn't let it get to him. Years of military training have taught him the value of patience and restraint. He knows that the truth will come out, that his identity will eventually be revealed. And when it does, these officers will be forced to confront their prejudices and their actions. But for now, Marcus chooses to wait. He knows that his silence speaks volumes, and he's not willing to reveal his hand too soon. As the hours tick by, Marcus reflects on the irony of the situation. Here he is, a man with the power to change his fate in an instant, yet he chooses to endure this mistreatment. It's not weakness that keeps him quiet, it's strength. The strength to allow the system to show its flaws, the strength to hold back when every instinct tells him to fight. He remembers his days in the field, where he often had to rely on patience and careful strategy to complete missions that seemed impossible. This is no different. Marcus knows that in this battle, the real enemy is ignorance and prejudice, and the best way to defeat it is not with force, but with truth. Conversations in the cell. As Marcus sits in his cell, the other detainees take notice of him. His calm, composed demeanor stands in stark contrast to the fear and anxiety that often fills the air in such a place. It doesn't take long before one of the other men, a young man named Darius, strikes up a conversation. "You don't seem like the type to end up in here," Darius says, leaning against the wall of the cell. "What did they get you for?" Marcus smiles faintly, his eyes still calm. "Nothing. A traffic stop that turned into an arrest, because they didn't like the way I looked." Darius shakes his head, chuckling bitterly. "Ain't that always the way? You look like you got money, and suddenly they think you're a drug dealer or something. Same story every time." Marcus doesn't respond, but Darius continues, intrigued by the older man's unshakable composure. "So, what are you gonna do? Fight it? Get a lawyer?" "I'm going to wait," Marcus replies simply. "The truth will come out eventually." There's something about the way Marcus says it that catches the attention of the other men in the cell. They sense that he's different, not just because of his suit or his quiet confidence, but because of something deeper. He carries himself like a man who knows the weight of the world, yet remains unfazed by it. Over the next few hours, the men in the cell continue to talk. Marcus listens more than he speaks, but when he does speak, his words carry weight. He talks about the importance of dignity, about not letting the system strip away one's humanity, no matter how unjust it may be. "You can't control how people see you," Marcus tells them, "but you can control how you respond. Don't give them the satisfaction of thinking they've beaten you." The other detainees listen closely, inspired by Marcus's wisdom and calm in the face of adversity. His presence in the cell, even for just a few hours, leaves a lasting impact on them. They see a man who refuses to be broken by a system that was designed to break people like him, and they can't help but admire him for it. A tipping point. While Marcus waits in the cell, his family search for him becomes more frantic. Amara has already called every local hospital, but with no luck. Now she's on the phone with precinct after precinct, desperately trying to find out if her husband has been arrested. Each time she gets the same response: no one by that name has been booked. Frustrated and scared, Amara calls her brother, Malcolm, a powerful attorney with connections in the city. Malcolm is known for taking on high-profile cases, often involving police misconduct and civil rights violations. If anyone can help find Marcus, it's him. "Malcolm, I think something's happened to Marcus. He hasn't come home. And I've called everywhere. No one's seen him," Amara says, her voice trembling. Malcolm immediately springs into action. He makes a few calls of his own, using his connections to track down any information about Marcus's whereabouts. It doesn't take long before he gets a lead. Someone at one of the precincts mentions that a man matching Marcus's description was brought in earlier that evening, though they didn't catch the name. Malcolm knows the system well enough to suspect what's going on. He's seen this scenario play out too many times. A successful black man arrested without cause, treated as a criminal based solely on his appearance. But Malcolm also knows that Marcus isn't just any man. He's someone with a powerful past, someone who commands respect. Without wasting any time, Malcolm heads down to the precinct himself. He knows that once he arrives, the officers will be forced to confront their mistake. But for now, he lets them remain in the dark, just as Marcus has. The tipping point is fast approaching. Marcus's identity, still a mystery to the officers, is about to be revealed, and when it is, it will send shockwaves through the station. But until that moment comes, Marcus remains patient, waiting for the truth to come to light on its own. In the cell, he continues to sit quietly, his calm presence a stark contrast to the tension building around him. He knows that the moment of reckoning is near, and when it comes, it will not only change the way the officers see him, but it will challenge the very assumptions that led to his arrest in the first place. A visitor arrives. The station is quieting down as the night wears on, but the tension remains palpable. Officer Daniels and Officer Reed are still convinced they'd done their job right, though the lack of evidence weighs on Reed's mind more than Daniels. Both men sit at their desks, occasionally glancing at the clock, waiting for the next shift change to take over. Suddenly, the front doors of the station swing open, and in walks Malcolm Tate, Amara's brother, a powerful attorney with an imposing presence. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his every step exudes authority, and his eyes are laser-focused as he approaches the front desk. The desk sergeant looks up, surprised to see someone of Malcolm's stature entering the station at this hour. The sergeant straightens in his chair, instinctively sensing that this isn't a man to be dismissed lightly. "I'm here for Marcus Wright," Malcolm says firmly, his voice carrying a weight that instantly shifts the atmosphere in the room. He doesn't ask if Marcus is here. He knows. His contacts have already confirmed it. Officer Daniels, hearing the name from his desk, stiffens and glances at Reed. Reed's face tightens, and a flicker of doubt flashes in his eyes. They hadn't run Marcus's name through any serious channels beyond a routine background check. They had no idea someone would come looking for him so soon, let alone a man like Malcolm Tate. The desk sergeant stammers, I'm not sure who that is, sir." Malcolm's gaze sharpens. "I suggest you find out quickly," he says, his tone cold and cutting. "Because if you don't, I'll make a few calls, and I guarantee you won't like the results." The sergeant hesitates for only a moment before scrambling to check the records. He pulls up the arrest report and quickly finds Marcus's name, listed under a vague description of resisting arrest and suspicious behavior. Malcolm watches as the sergeant fumbles with the computer, then turns to Daniels and Reed, who are now standing by the front desk, their postures stiff with uncertainty. "Which one of you brought him in?" Malcolm asks, though he already knows the answer. His piercing gaze lands on Daniels, whose face turns red as he tries to maintain his composure. "I did," Daniels says, his voice gruff. "Why? Is he someone special?" Malcolm doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he steps closer to Daniels, his presence intimidating. "You arrested a man without cause, and now you're asking me if he's someone special." He pauses, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You have no idea who you've put in that cell, do you?" The truth unfolds. Daniels and Reed exchange nervous glances. Malcolm's tone and confidence unsettle them, but they still don't fully understand what's happening. They had assumed Marcus was just another man they could push around without consequence. But Malcolm's arrival changes everything. "Who is he?" Reed finally asks, his voice betraying a hint of anxiety. Malcolm crosses his arms, his eyes narrowing. "Marcus Wright is a man of immense integrity, someone who has dedicated his life to serving others. But that's not all." He leans in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "He's also a decorated military veteran. Not just any veteran, either. He was a high-ranking officer in one of the most elite divisions of the military. His work was so classified that even now, most people have no idea the extent of his service." Daniel's face drains of color. His arrogance falters, replaced by disbelief. "Wait, what? He's military? A decorated general?" Malcolm continues, his voice cutting through the room. "One who saved countless lives in operations you'll never hear about. He's respected by some of the highest-ranking officials in this country. And you?" Malcolm points at Daniels. "You threw him in a cell because you assumed he didn't belong in a nice car in this part of town." Reed looks horrified. "A general. But he didn't say anything." "He didn't need to," Malcolm replies sharply. That's not who Marcus is. He's a man of humility, not one to flaunt his status or power. But make no mistake, he could have destroyed you with a phone call. Instead, he chose to let you show exactly who you are. The weight of Malcolm's words crashes down on the officers like a tidal wave. They both stand frozen, their minds racing as they process the magnitude of their error. Daniel swallows hard, his bravado crumbling as the full scope of his actions becomes clear. The officers' reactions. Daniel's is the first to speak, though his voice wavers with uncertainty. I didn't know. We were just doing our job. He looked suspicious. Suspicious. Malcolm interrupts, his voice rising in disbelief. You arrested him because of his appearance, because of where he was driving. Don't tell me you were just doing your job. This was racial profiling, plain and simple, and now you're going to face the consequences. Reed takes a step back, his hands trembling slightly. We made a mistake. We didn't know who he was. Knowing who he is shouldn't matter. Malcolm snaps, his eyes narrowing with disgust. Whether Marcus Wright was a general or an ordinary man, you had no right to treat him the way you did. Daniels opens his mouth to protest, but closes it again when he realizes he has no defense. The enormity of their mistake is undeniable. The man they humiliated, the man they handcuffed and treated like a common criminal, was a hero, a man who had risked his life for his country, who had saved lives while they sat comfortably behind their badges. As the truth of Marcus's identity sinks in, fear begins to overtake their arrogance. They had assumed they held all the power, that Marcus was just another man to be processed and forgotten. But now, they understand that their actions could cost them everything. Their reputations, their careers, even their freedom. Malcolm steps back and gestures toward the holding cells. You're going to release him now. And then you're going to apologize. Daniels looks at Reed, his face pale and sweaty. The two officers don't say a word as they move toward the cells, their pride shattered. They unlock Marcus's cell door, and for the first time since his arrest, Marcus rises from his seat, calm and collected as ever. He steps out of the cell with an air of dignity, his eyes meeting Daniel's and Reed's with a quiet strength that makes them both shrink in shame. A moment of realization. As Marcus stands before them, the gravity of their mistake settles in fully. Daniels, who had been so quick to judge, now finds himself unable to meet Marcus's gaze. He stammers an apology, but the words sound hollow even to his own ears. I didn't know who you were, Daniels mumbles, his eyes fixed on the floor. Marcus studies the two officers for a moment, his face unreadable. He could lash out, demand retribution, or make them pay for their actions. But that's not who Marcus is. He's spent a lifetime rising above the hatred and ignorance of others, and he knows that this moment is not about revenge. It's about teaching a lesson. You didn't know who I was, Marcus says quietly, his voice steady. But that's the problem, isn't it? You shouldn't have to know someone's background to treat them with respect. You shouldn't need a reason to treat someone like a human being. Daniels nods, still unable to look Marcus in the eye. You're right. We were wrong. I'm sorry. Reed, too, stammers out an apology, his face flushed with embarrassment. We didn't mean. Marcus holds up a hand to stop him. I'm not interested in your excuses. What I want is for you to remember this moment. The next time you're about to make assumptions about someone based on the color of their skin or the neighborhood they're in, remember this. Malcolm stands beside Marcus, watching the officers with a stern expression. This isn't over, he warns. There will be consequences for what you've done here tonight. But if you learn from this, if you change the way you do your jobs, maybe something good can come out of it. With that, Marcus and Malcolm turn to leave the station. As they walk out, the weight of their presence lingers, leaving the officers in stunned silence. The world outside is quiet, but inside the station, the echoes of their mistake will reverberate for a long time to come. And for Daniels and Reed, the truth is undeniable. They had judged a man not by his character, but by their own prejudices, and it had cost them dearly. The internal conflict of the officers. In the days following the arrest of Marcus Wright, the mood inside the precinct shifts dramatically. The officers who once strutted around with bravado now move with a sense of unease, especially Officer Daniels and Officer Reed. The revelation of Marcus's true identity had struck a nerve, not only with them, but with the entire police department. The fallout has begun, and both officers know that their actions have set in motion a chain of events they can no longer control. Officer Daniels, in particular, struggles with conflicting emotions. At first, he tries to rationalize what happened. "We were doing our job," he tells himself repeatedly. But the more he replays the incident in his mind, the less convincing the argument becomes. He can't shake the image of Marcus, calm and dignified, despite the unjust treatment he endured. Deep down, Daniels knows that what he did wasn't about enforcing the law. It was about power, prejudice, and control. The realization gnaws at him, creating a dissonance he's never felt before. Reed, on the other hand, is consumed by guilt. Unlike Daniels, who hides behind layers of arrogance, Reed is acutely aware of the wrong they committed. His stomach churns each time he thinks about the way they treated Marcus, a man who never raised his voice, never resisted, and yet was thrown into a cell without cause. Reed's sleep is restless, haunted by the knowledge that he was complicit in something deeply wrong. He begins to wonder if he's in the right line of work. If his role as an officer is meant to protect and serve, how did he end up perpetuating the very systems of injustice he once vowed to fight? Other officers in the precinct react differently. Some, like Officer Grant, try to sweep the incident under the rug. Grant is quick to defend Daniels, claiming the arrest was justified because of Marcus's suspicious behavior. "The guy was driving through a high-crime area in a flashy car," Grant says dismissively. What were we supposed to think? But even as he deflects blame, Grant can't completely shake the unease that lingers in the air. Deep down, he knows they're on thin ice. There are whispers among the officers, some of them starting to question the practices they've long accepted as normal. Others, however, dig their heels in, refusing to acknowledge the deeper issues at play. The station becomes divided between those who want to pretend nothing happened and those who can't escape the weight of their conscience. The protagonist's grace. Meanwhile, Marcus is quietly moving forward with his life, though the experience has left a profound impact on him. Despite the humiliation he suffered, he holds no desire for revenge. Marcus has always believed in the power of grace, even in the face of injustice. It's this belief that guides him now, as the media begins to pick up on the story of his wrongful arrest. When reporters reach out to Marcus for a statement, expecting him to condemn the officers and call for their dismissal, he surprises everyone with his response. "I don't want to see anyone lose their job," Marcus tells the press in a calm, measured tone. "This isn't about punishing individuals. It's about addressing the larger issue. What happened to me is part of a pattern, and if we're going to change that, we need to focus on education and reform, not just punishment." His words are met with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. Some wonder how Marcus can be so forgiving after what he went through. Others see him as a model of restraint and wisdom, using his platform not for personal gain, but to shine a light on the deeper problems in the system. Marcus takes the opportunity to teach a lesson, not just to the officers who wronged him, but to the public at large. He talks about the dangers of prejudice, how easy it is to judge someone based on appearance rather than character, and how those judgments can have devastating consequences. Too often, we see people not as individuals, but as stereotypes, Marcus says during an interview with a major news outlet. "That's what happened to me, but I'm not angry. What I want is for us to learn from this. We need to challenge our assumptions and start treating each other with the respect and dignity we all deserve." His message resonates with many, though not everyone is willing to listen. There are still voices, both inside and outside the police force, who refuse to acknowledge the systemic issues at play. But Marcus's grace in the face of adversity forces people to confront uncomfortable truths, even if they're not ready to admit them. A public outcry. As news of Marcus's wrongful arrest spreads, the public begins to react. The story takes on a life of its own, amplified by social media and news outlets. People are outraged, not only by the treatment Marcus received, but by the underlying racial bias that allowed it to happen. Protests erupt across the city, with demonstrators calling for accountability and reform within the police department. Signs reading "Justice for Marcus" and "End Racial Profiling" fill the streets as people march in solidarity. The protests are peaceful, but their message is loud and clear. Enough is enough. The community, particularly people of color, has long endured these injustices in silence. But Marcus's story brings their struggles to the forefront, forcing a conversation that can no longer be ignored. The pressure mounts on the police department as local officials begin to take notice. The police chief is forced to hold a press conference, acknowledging that the arrest was a mistake. "We take these concerns seriously," the chief says, though his words sound rehearsed, an attempt to placate the public rather than address the root of the problem. Behind the scenes, the department scrambles to handle the situation. Internal investigations are launched, and both Daniels and Reed are placed on administrative leave pending a review. The officers, once so sure of their authority, now find themselves under intense scrutiny. Every action they took during Marcus's arrest is dissected, analyzed, and critiqued by the public and the media. Despite the department's attempts to manage the fallout, the protests continue to grow. Community leaders, civil rights activists, and everyday citizens demand not just apologies but real, meaningful change. They call for better training, particularly on issues of racial profiling and implicit bias. They demand that officers be held accountable for their actions, not just in Marcus's case, but in all instances where racial bias has played a role in policing. As the public outcry intensifies, Marcus remains a calm but powerful figure at the center of the storm. He attends a few of the protests, speaking to the crowd not with anger, but with hope. "We can do better," he tells the demonstrators. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about making sure that no one else has to go through what I went through. And we can only do that if we come together, not to tear each other down, but to build something better." The ripple effect. The story of Marcus's arrest continues to gain traction, reaching national news outlets. People across the country are talking about it, about the injustice, about the need for reform, and about Marcus's remarkable grace in the face of such mistreatment. His story becomes a symbol of both the problem and the solution, sparking debates in households, city councils, and police departments far beyond the city where the arrest took place. The ripple effect is undeniable. Other cases of wrongful arrests and racial profiling come to light as people feel emboldened to share their own stories. The momentum for change grows, and soon, police departments across the state begin to implement new training programs aimed at addressing implicit bias and improving community relations. Marcus's decision not to seek revenge, but instead to use his experience as a catalyst for change, has a profound impact. His actions force people to confront their own prejudices, to question the systems they've long accepted, and to imagine a future where justice is not determined by skin color. For Daniels and Reed, the consequences are personal and professional. While Reed expresses genuine remorse and takes steps to educate himself, Daniels struggles with the loss of his authority. He's reprimanded, and though he keeps his job after the investigation concludes, he's never the same. The power he once wielded carelessly is now a constant reminder of the responsibility he failed to uphold. As for Marcus, he moves forward with his life, continuing his work as a successful entrepreneur and community leader. The experience has changed him, but not in the way the officers might have intended. It's deepened his commitment to fighting injustice, not through anger or revenge, but through understanding and compassion. Marcus remains a man of quiet strength, using his voice to uplift others and pave the way for a future where dignity and respect are not luxuries, but rights. In the end, Marcus's story becomes more than just an incident of wrongful arrest. It becomes a call to action, a reminder that the power to create change lies within all of us, even in the face of injustice. A legal case. Despite the immense pressure from his family, friends, and even legal experts to take aggressive legal action, Marcus Wright makes a decision that shocks many. He chooses not to press charges against the officers or the police department. This is not because he forgives their actions without consequence, but because Marcus believes there's a greater battle to be fought, a battle that goes beyond the courtroom. Instead of filing lawsuits or seeking punitive damages, Marcus uses the platform he now commands to initiate a much-needed conversation about systemic reform. He organizes a press conference, drawing both local and national media. The room is packed with reporters, activists, and community leaders, all eager to hear what he has to say. Standing behind the podium, Marcus speaks with the same quiet dignity that has defined him throughout the ordeal. His voice is calm but resolute, every word carrying the weight of a man who has lived through both the best and worst of society. "I'm not here today to talk about revenge," Marcus begins, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm not here to demand punishment. What I am here to do is to ask for change. Real, meaningful change. The kind that goes beyond headlines and hashtags." He pauses, letting the words settle over the crowd. "What happened to me isn't just my story," Marcus continues. "It's the story of thousands of people who face similar situations every day, but don't have the platform I've been given to speak out. It's about the countless men and women who are judged by the color of their skin, by the car they drive, by the neighborhood they live in. This isn't just about one incident. This is about a system that needs reform." Marcus goes on to talk about the need for police departments to invest in better training, particularly in implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. He advocates for policies that hold officers accountable for their actions, while also supporting them in becoming better public servants. "We can't expect things to get better if we don't take action to make them better," Marcus says, his voice steady but impassioned. This isn't about being anti-police. It's about being pro-justice. It's about compassion, fairness, and respect. Things we all deserve, no matter who we are. By the end of the press conference, Marcus has captivated the audience. His decision to use his experience as a platform for change, rather than revenge, inspires many, including those who may not have initially understood the depth of the problem. Marcus's words echo across the nation, sparking conversations in cities far beyond his own. A transformation for the officers. While Marcus's decision not to press charges brings relief to the officers involved, it also ignites a profound shift in their lives, particularly in Officer Reed. Unlike Daniels, who clings to the remnants of his pride, Reed can't shake the experience. The arrest of Marcus Wright has become a turning point in his life, one that forces him to confront not only his actions that night, but the larger issues within the system he serves. For weeks after the incident, Reed grapples with the guilt. He replays the arrest over and over in his mind. The way he and Daniels escalated the situation, the assumptions they made, the prejudice they allowed to guide their actions. Each time, he feels a deeper sense of shame. But as time passes, that shame begins to transform into something else, a desire to make things right. Reed starts reading about implicit bias, racial profiling, and the history of policing in marginalized communities. The more he learns, the more he realizes how deeply ingrained these issues are, not just within the department, but within himself. He starts attending seminars and workshops on diversity and police-community relations, eager to understand what he can do to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. One day, Reed makes a decision that surprises his colleagues. He approaches his superiors and asks to lead a new initiative, one focused on improving police training, specifically in areas like racial sensitivity, bias awareness, and de-escalation techniques. He volunteers to be the face of the program, despite the backlash he knows he'll face from some of his fellow officers. "I want to make sure what happened with Marcus Wright never happens again," Reed tells the police chief. "We have to do better. I have to do better." Reed's transformation doesn't go unnoticed. Though some officers resent his new path, others quietly respect him for owning up to his mistakes and taking responsibility. Over time, the initiative gains traction, and Reed becomes a leader in advocating for police reform within the department. It's not an easy road, but it's one he's committed to walking. The protagonist's legacy. As Reed works to reform the police department from within, Marcus's influence continues to ripple outward. His calm, measured response to the injustice he faced leaves a lasting legacy that extends far beyond the immediate community. People across the country take note of Marcus's grace under pressure, his refusal to pursue vengeance or personal gain, choosing instead to advocate for systemic change, becomes a model for others facing similar struggles. His story is shared in classrooms, community centers, and town halls as an example of how to challenge injustice in a way that promotes growth rather than division. Activists and community leaders cite Marcus's handling of the situation as a turning point in the movement for police reform. His message of compassion, respect, and fairness resonates with people from all walks of life, inspiring a new generation of leaders to approach issues of racial inequality with thoughtfulness and determination. Marcus's own life continues to flourish as well. He remains deeply involved in his community, working to uplift those who are marginalized and providing opportunities for the next generation. His tech company, which he once saw as a way to escape his past, becomes a vehicle for his future, a platform for him to mentor young entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds, giving them the tools to succeed in a world that often underestimates them. Years later, when people look back on Marcus Wright's story, they don't just see a man who was wronged. They see a man who took that wrong and turned it into something powerful. His legacy is one of quiet strength, of using one's influence to uplift others, of challenging the status quo without resorting to hatred or violence. Final reflection. As the years pass, Marcus reflects on the experience that changed the trajectory of his life. He knows that in many ways, the arrest was a turning point, not just for him, but for the community and the police department as well. The lessons learned from that night have shaped him into a stronger, more compassionate leader, and they have forced others to confront their own prejudices. He often thinks back to the night of his arrest and the choices he made in the aftermath. He could have used his connections and power to crush those who wronged him, but he chose a different path, one of humility, forgiveness, and a relentless commitment to justice. In doing so, he taught a lesson that went beyond the officers involved. He taught a lesson about humanity. Marcus realizes that identity is more than just who you are on the surface. It's about how you carry yourself when no one is watching. It's about standing firm in your principles, even when it's easier to give in to anger or vengeance. It's about recognizing that true power doesn't come from exerting force over others. It comes from lifting others up, even when they've tried to bring you down. His final reflection isn't one of bitterness, but of hope. Hope that the seeds he planted through his actions will continue to grow, inspiring others to challenge injustice with dignity, compassion, and grace. Hope that the system he helped change will continue to evolve, becoming fairer and more just with each passing year. In the end, Marcus's story isn't just about one man's journey. It's about the power of identity, humility, and the importance of treating others with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. It's a reminder that in a world often divided by prejudice and fear, we all have the power to be agents of change, if only we have the courage to act with love and understanding.